So, I've recently been having a lot of audio issues with the channel, either like my voice being too quiet, the music being too loud, or the transitionary scenes being like too loud, too quiet, something like that. I think I figured out all of the issues and why these things are happening, but just in case, I figured I'd make this little fun video. One is a cool, niche, interesting topic, but also as an audio test, so please let me know if there's any issues with the audio down in the comments below. And with that being said, I'm Pliskin, and you hear a lot of people talking about cut levels, cut weapons, cut concepts from their favorite games, but cut characters tends to be a little bit more of a niche topic. And honestly, I think it's probably one of the most significant pieces of cut content a game can have. Because sure, in Metal Gear Solid 5, you might not have the sheep hat, which would have been cool to the gameplay. But if there was an entire character cut out of the game completely, that would hold a little bit more weight to not only the story, but how the game would play, the experience that you would have as the player going through it. So today I found 5 interesting cut characters, and I wanted to take some time to talk about them. So let's get right on into it. Now, there's a lot about Batman I like, especially when I was like a teenager, I was really into Batman. I like the gothic themes, I like the crazy enemies, and I like the idea of like a semi-possible superhero. I mean, now it's very clear to me that the things Batman does is very impossible, but I don't know, there was something about like the illusion of implied realism that made Batman interesting. It's kind of the same appeal as when I'm playing, Snake Eater and I'm playing as a relatively normal dude and I have to go up against people with superpowers. There's something about that that's just inherently fun and engaging. And as such, Batman's rogue gallery tends to have a lot of people that have weird superpowers or science-y gimmicks that would normally give them an edge over other people, and Batman has to overcome that. One of these villains that I've always found interesting is the Mad Hatter. One in part because anything that's like kind of Alice in Wonderland theme I tend to enjoy a lot. Speaking of which, we really have to talk about Alice Madness Returns someday. I still having issues with recording equipment, so I'm just using footage I already have archived. But when I do have that recording equipment, we really need to find a way to talk about this game. But anyways, you have the Mad Hatter, who uses hats to basically plant mind control devices on top of people's heads, and obviously there's an Alice in Wonderland theme there. Now, while the Mad Hatter makes an appearance in Batman Arkham City, and it's a pretty cool appearance too, with a side quest where he catches you by surprise and all of a sudden you need to fight your way out of this nightmare realm. You have this really cool scene where you have to like fight out of the control and you get this like really like fucked up mask imagery of Batman's face. Like, it's cool. Like, just take a look at this.
You will do anything I want. No. This isn't right. You can't be doing this.
And then yeah, it's this weird kind of surreal battleground where you fight your way out of there, you take down the Mad Hatter, and you move on. It's a small little tidbit of just like a jolt out of the, normal flow and patterns you have while playing Arkham City. But what if I told you that the Mad Hatter was also supposed to be in Arkham Asylum? Now, in Arkham Asylum, there was supposed to be this hedge maze that you would have to go through, and within it, the Mad Hatter would be there. And he would have all of his goons under control with their mind, and it would be this like whole surreal Alice in Wonderland thing. But that was cut out of the game. Now, this is one of those cases where I'm putting the Mad Hatter at the bottom of the list because I understand why he was cut. You have an enemy that's all about, twisting your mind and showing you the surreal and catching you off guard like he does in Arkham City in a game where you have fucking Scarecrow. Now, I've talked about many times how Scarecrow is basically the better version of, how everyone makes a big deal out of Psycho Mantis. Scarecrow is really that fourth wall, fuck with your mind kind of boss, and he does it so well in Arkham Asylum. So having the Mad Hatter there would just feel like excess, and yeah, it would just be it would just be like two villains competing for the same role, the same mechanics, the same kind of boss fights. So yeah, Mad Hatter is really cool. He has a really cool section in Arkham City. It would have been cool to see how he would have, spiced up Arkham Asylum even more, but I understand why he was cut. I don't play a lot of JRPGs. It's not really my kind of thing. However, I do like the Persona games. I got into them way back when I was younger and I watched the Persona 4 anime, and then, I tried out the games here and there, or, I'd get the game from my brother and watch him play through it because he likes JRPGs. But yeah, these games are pretty cool. But there's one Persona game, well, there's a couple, but the one in particular we're talking about today is a fighting game featuring characters from Persona 3 and Persona 4. It's called Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, one of those things with a super long title. Now, I found out that there were supposed to be two characters in the already large roster that were meant to be fighters, and that is Nanako and Dojima. Now, these two characters are just, your uncle who's like a worn down veteran cop, and then your baby cousin pretty much. So originally in this fighting game, you were supposed to be able to square up against your baby cousin and your uncle who's too tired for all of this shit. Now, while I could totally see your uncle showing up to kick the shit out of you and your friends and all that, and I think him as a character would have been kind of interesting, I really don't see how, a character that's supposed to represent childhood innocence and wonder would really fit into a fighting game without becoming something a little bit more twisted. So I'm kind of glad that the developers at Atlus shot this idea down really quick. But yeah, you could have been playing a Persona game where, you're beating the shit out of a character you usually try to, take care of and protect. So I figured that was worth a mention. Now, you guys notice that when I talk about Halo, I never really talk about the 343 era Halos with the exception of Halo Infinite. That's because I never really got into the Reclaimer saga and everything they were doing with 4 and 5. However, Halo 4 does kind of have a special place in my heart because when I was about 12 years old, I didn't know any better. Halo 4 was just the newest Halo coming out, so my expectations were like, oh my god, it's gonna be just like Halo Reach, but with more. So I really wanted it for Christmas, and my parents said, hey, if you go and you sit on Santa's lap and ask for Halo 4, you will get it for Christmas. And I was like, really? I was 12, so I thought it was just too cool for everything else, right? But I went and I sat on Santa's lap and I got Halo 4 for Christmas. And at first I enjoyed it, and there's still some parts I enjoy to this day, but I definitely see the faults within it. However, if there's one thing that's just more so unanimously disappointing, it's Halo 5. Now, there's a cut character from Halo 5 that I feel would have made it a much more interesting game. You see, Halo 5 went with the whole plot point of turning Cortana, your friendly AI that made a noble sacrifice in the last game, return as the villain for some reason, and now it's supposed to be, Terminator with AIs versus humanity, and that's just kind of dumb and not really Halo. But originally, we can see there are some concept art drawings for a destroyed Didact, wearing the same kind of robes that we saw Chief wearing in that one initial trailer for Halo 5. And the idea of a, Didact that's not so cocky, that's not so full of himself, that recognizes humanity as a threat now, would have been an interesting enemy. A Didact that's more careful, that's more planning, and the juxtaposition between him and Chief, two broken down legendary warriors, still fighting because that's really all they have left, that sounds like a much more interesting story than whatever the fuck was going on in Halo 5. Of course, 343 backpedaled on a lot of the story they made in Halo 4, and then they completely backpedaled on everything they did in Halo 5. And I think that's because they have a habit of listening to the wrong criticisms. I don't think anybody wanted them to just blank slate rewrite their story. I think what people wanted was split screen, more of an emphasis on balancing your enemies and making the gameplay a little bit more Halo-y instead of Call of Duty. But, you know, this is 343 we're talking about, and if there's one thing 343 does well, it's have really cool concepts that are either executed on poorly, or in this case, not executed on at all. Alright, coming in at the number 2 spot, we're going to be talking about Metal Gear Solid 2. Now, I've recently talked about how much I love everything about this game, how I prefer it even over Snake Eater. But there's one concept character that kind of shows how Metal Gear Solid 2 could have been a much more darker and depressing game. You see, in the base game of Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden reaches the end of the game and realizes that there are things that are real in his life and deserve his time, that being Rose and their oncoming baby. However, in the original drafts of Metal Gear Solid 2, the entire codec team was supposed to be AIs like the Colonel. So instead of having Rose, you had this more prototype version of her that was more so just a white Mei Ling. You had this character called Max, who would save your game, flirt with Raiden, and of course quote Shakespeare proverbs to juxtapose Mei Ling by being like a Western version of her. Now, Max eventually would become Rose. However, what's really interesting about Max and all the other people that you would have had there is that they aren't real. That moment where you get the reveal that the Colonel is fake, you would learn that your entire team is fake. And that moment of just seeing all the people that were involved in Raiden's life not existing at all, I could only imagine how twisted that ending would have felt. It would have been so dark and damper. Like, I imagine this is why Max got changed out for Rose. Because without that little bit of levity and hope, Metal Gear Solid 2 wouldn't have just been a crazy mindfuck, but it would have been a crazy mindfuck followed by severe depression. So yeah, Max as a concept character for a darker Metal Gear Solid 2 is definitely worth mentioning on this list. Now this brings us to number 1, and this is in my opinion the most interesting cut concept character because there's so many references to her and ways you can still play as her. In the original draft of Resident Evil 2, referred to as Resident Evil 1.5, instead of playing as Claire Redfield, you were going to be able to play as Elza Walker, who is still a college student, I believe, but is like a professional motorcycle racer or something, which shows, you know, the getup. And yeah, in this draft, you were going to be playing as this chick that was basically still Claire Redfield without, you know, being related to Chris Redfield. And yeah, I'm not sure exactly why they changed it, made it Claire. Maybe they wanted to make everything feel more interconnected. But yeah, Elza Walker was a thing, and what makes her really interesting is that this version of Resident Evil is playable, either through intense PC modding, and I think there's even PlayStation 1 CDs of Resident Evil 1.5 because they got a long way through it before, you know, scrapping and starting the entire development over. But yeah, Elza Walker does kind of exist in a game that is kind of playable. So she's a cut character, but she still has her own space. She still has her own game. It's just really hard to get your hands on since it's not technically official. Luckily, fans have made it easier to approach this, but yeah. Capcom definitely recognizes the legend and infamy of Elza Walker as a character, because with the Resident Evil 2 remake, you're able to play as Elza Walker, or at least in costume form. You see, one of the DLC costumes you can get for Claire is an Elza Walker costume, and it looks freaking phenomenal. It looks really cool. I love how it's like sponsored by Stagla, which is the gas station you see in Resident Evil 3. It's a really nice little piece of Raccoon City lore. It's a nice interesting piece of like the meta lore surrounding Resident Evil. And I've never really seen another case of a cut character still having such a prevalent foothold over a franchise, over other characters, or in the fan base's like eyes. So yeah, the coolest cut character is easily Elza Walker. But yeah, that's this video is more so for fun. I hope the audio is working okay. Again, if there's anything wrong with it, please let me know down in the comments below. This has been Pliskin, and if this video turns out completely alright, I'll use this as more as the standard for how I handle audio in future videos. Anyways, this has been Pliskin, over and out.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.